Do a series of videos on quercetin versus Alzheimer's disease and brain cancer specifically. And like I said, the reason I'm doing this is quercetin is one phytonutrient out of thousands, okay? And I want to make sure people understand that. Now, hormesis, what hormesis is hormesis is stress adaptation. And this is going to show how hormesis and the synergy pathways and mechanisms of quercetin in cancer prevention and management. But quercetin is unique. Now, before I start this, I want to remind people, I'm not a physician. I'm not a doctor of osteopathic manipulation. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a naturopathic doctor. I'm not a chiropractor. I'm not a nurse. I'm not a CNA. I'm not an LPN. I'm not an RN. I'm not a nurse practitioner. I'm not a physical therapist. I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not a dietitian. I have no medical training whatsoever. Okay, so don't take my word for any of this. This video is not medical advice, and neither is any other video on this channel. Nothing on this channel, whether it's a video or in the community tab, should be taken as medical advice, because it's not. If you have a medical concern or question, ask somebody with a medical degree and a license. Okay, now moving on. So quercetin is a unique dietary polyphenol because it can exert biphasic dose responses on cells depending on its concentration. Cancer preventative effects of quercetin are observed at concentrations approximately 1 to 40 micromoles and are likely mediated by quercetin's antioxidant properties. Pro-oxidant effects are present at cellular concentrations of 40 to 100 micromoles. However, at higher concentrations, many novel pathways, in addition to radical oxygen species, contribute to its effects. The potent bioavailability, the potent bioactivity of quercetin has led to vigorous study of this compound and revealed numerous pathways that could interact synergistically. They could interact synergistically to prevent or treat cancer. The effect of intake and concentration on emerging pathways and how they may interact are discussed in this review. And unfortunately, it's not present, but I thought you would like me to begin with that, so I'm moving. Anti-genotoxic effects of quercetin, rutin, ursolic acid on HepG2 cells, evaluation by a COMET assay. Okay, the present study, the chemoprotective effects of quercetin, rutin, or ursolic acid on tert-butyl hydroperoxide induced DNA damage in human hepatoma cell line were investigated by the COMET assay to determine whether protection was due to direct chemical interactions alone or to cellular-mediated responses. 3 different types of treatments were used: simultaneous incubation of cells with individual test components or test compounds, and the toxicant it's funny, I used to have a friend that was a laboratory tech, and she used to refer to the incubator as the hot refrigerator. I just thought that was humorous to say that. So, pre-treatment with test compound before addition of the toxicant, followed or not by a recovery period. The expression of blah blah blah. Okay, the results show that quercetin and ursolic acid prevented DNA damage and had anti-proliferative properties in HepG2 cells, suggesting that anti-carcinogenic potential for these compounds. So they have anti-carcinogenic potential. Okay, the protective effects of quercetin against TBHP-induced DNA damage seem to be due to both direct effects on TBHP toxicity and to cellular-mediated indirect effects. So it's both direct and indirect effects that are causing this. Direct chemical reactions as well as, direct chemical influence as well as metabolite chemical influence. Ursolic acid seems to exert its effects only through cellularly mediated mechanisms, since it was not protective in simultaneous incubation. Quercetin and ursolic acid also showed to increase the rate of DNA repair. So quercetin increases the rate of DNA repair. Okay, rutin did not have effects at any level. Health effects of quercetin, from antioxidant to nutraceutical. Quercetin, a member of the flavonoid family, is one of the most prominent dietary antioxidants. It is one of the most prominent dietary antioxidants. It is ubiquitously present in foods including vegetables, fruit, tea, and wine, as well as countless food supplements, and is claimed to exert beneficial health effects. This includes protection against various diseases, such as osteoporosis and certain forms of cancer, pulmonary and cardiovascular diseases, but also against aging itself, especially the ability of quercetin to scavenge highly reactive species such as peroxynitrate and hydroxyl radical is suggested to be involved in these possible beneficial health effects. Consequently, numerous studies have been performed to gather scientific evidence for these beneficial health claims, as well as data regarding the exact mechanism of action. The purpose, blah, 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 blah. Okay, moving forward. Molecular targets underlying the anti-cancer effects of quercetin. Quercetin, a medicinally important member of the flavonoid family, is one of the most prominent dietary antioxidants. It is present in a variety of foods, fruits, vegetables, tea, wine, blah, blah, blah. Numerous pharmacological effects of quercetin include protection against diseases such as osteoporosis, certain forms of malignant tumors, and pulmonary and cardiovascular disorders. Quercetin has the special ability of scavenging highly reactive species such as hydrogen peroxide, superoxide anion, and hydroxyl radicals. These oxygen radicals are called reactive oxygen species, which can cause oxidative damage to cellular components such as proteins, lipids, and deoxyribonucleic acid, so DNA. Okay, so it stops DNA damage, and it also, if you remember from the first thing I covered, it encourages DNA repair. Various oxygen radicals play important roles in pathophysiological and degenerative processes like aging. Subsequently, several studies have been performed to evaluate possible advantageous health effects of quercetin and to collect scientific evidence for these beneficial health claims. These studies also gather data in order to evaluate the exact mechanism of action and toxicological effects of quercetin. The purpose of the review, blah, blah, blah. So let's see what this is here. So this is showing how the data was gathered. This is showing the different structures, the different quercetins. So this is all the different quercetins. And this is what quercetin affects. These are the molecular targets. This is about the mitochondria right here. As you can see, the little mitochondria has a little thing saying mitochondria. Okay. And moving on. Quercetin suppresses human glioblastoma migration. Quercetin suppresses glioblastoma, a form of cancer's migration and invasion. High invasiveness is a biological and clinical characteristic of glioblastoma and predicts poor prognosis of patients. Quercetin, a natural flavonoid compound, exhibits anti-cancer activity. However, we have a limited understanding of the possible underlying mechanism of quercetin in glioblastoma. In this study, we investigated the anti-cancer effect of quercetin in human glioblastoma cells. Our results showed that quercetin markedly suppressed the viability of glioblastomas, meaning it stopped their viability. They were no longer capable of being alive in a functional way, in vitro and in vivo, so both in the dish and in the body, and significantly inhibited glioblastoma cell migration, so it stopped it from moving. Okay. Moreover, quercetin reversed EMT-like I don't know what this is. This is some kind of Yiddish they got going on here. But let's go to the results. Results: quercetin inhibits the proliferation of glioma cells. The chemical structure of quercetin is known Is shown in Figure 1A. After treatment with different concentrations of quercetin, 24 and 48 hour, the cell viability of 3 glioma cell lines was evaluated using the assay, which is a chunk of it. The cell viability of all 3 tested glioma cell lines was inhibited by quercetin in dose and time-dependent manners, meaning the higher the dose and the longer it was given, the more it affected the cancer, the more it deactivated the cancer and screwed up the cancer. So let's see here. Quercetin inhibits spontaneous movement of glioma cells. The effect of quercetin on these different lines of cancer and its spontaneous movement was assessed with high-content imaging technology for cell motility, blah, 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 blah. The accumulated distance, the cells were imaged, blah, 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 blah. Quercetin inhibits glioma cells' migration and invasion. To further explore the effects of quercetin on cell motility, we used wound healing assays to evaluate cell migration and performed transwell assays to assess cell invasion. The results indicated that quercetin markedly suppressed the wound healing ability of these cell lines, these cancerous cell lines, with a wound healing assay. The transwell, blah, 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 to further confirm that quercetin significantly reduced the invasive capacity of these cell lines, these cancerous cell lines. Interaction of quercetin with this pathway here. Quercetin suppresses this here, so previous findings have indicated that with this specific line of cancer, I'm sorry. So they found that quercetin did not affect the promoter activity, further supporting that quercetin does not affect the transcription. Okay, let's see here. Quercetin inhibits EMT-like mesenchymal mesenchymal and glioblastoma invasion in vivo. Discussion. Glioblastoma is the most prevalent and most malignant of primary brain tumor with poor overall prognosis. At present, it is well known that natural products represent a type of promising anti-cancer drugs and inhibit tumor growth and prevent drug resistance. Another research, blah, blah, blah. Moving on. The flavonoid quercetin ameliorates Alzheimer's disease pathology and protects cognitive and emotional function in aged triple transgenic Alzheimer's disease model mice. Okay, then Alzheimer's disease is the most common senile dementia in the world, although important progress has been made in understanding the pathogenesis of Alzheimer's disease. Current understanding of the pathogenesis of Alzheimer's disease, current therapeutic approaches provide only modest symptomatic relief. In this study, they evaluated the neuroprotective effects of quercetin, blah, 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 blah. So our data showed that quercetin decreases it improves proteostasis, the balance of proteins. It gets rid of the beta amyloid plaques, the beta amyloidosis, the tau pathology, okay, and the microgliosis in the hippocampus and amygdala. These results were reported by a significant reduction in paired levels of decrease, yada, yada, yada. So let's take a look at these images here. So this, you'll see that the quercetin and vehicle, blah, 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 were administered to 18 and 21-month-old mice. Quercetin protects the neuronal population and the subunity, okay? Quercetin ameliorates, meaning gets rid of amyloid beta plaques in the evaluated brain areas. Quercetin decreases tau pathologies in Alzheimer's disease mice. So it's getting rid of Alzheimer's disease. Quercetin decreases astrogliosis in the mice. in the Alzheimer's disease mice. Quercetin ameliorates gliosis in the mice. Okay. Quercetin protects spatial learning and memory function, okay? So it gets rid of the symptoms too. It protects spatial learning and function in the mice. Quercetin increases anxiolytic activity and risk assessment. Quercetin, blah, blah, okay, that's just going backward, moving. The flavanols, quercetin, camphorol, and myricetin inhibit hepatocyte growth factor-induced medulloblastoma cell migration. Okay, so medulloblastoma, the most common malignant brain tumor in children, is highly metastatic, meaning it can spread easy. Recently, blah, 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 receptor of the tyrosine kinase. Furthermore, quercetin and camphorol also strongly diminished this pathway here. Okay. Okay. They first examined, this is quercetin, myricetin, and camphorol inhibit MET phosphorylation induced by, okay, so they first examined the effect of dietary flavanols quintessence. Okay, the green tea quercetin EGCG was used as a positive control because this polyphenol successfully inhibits HGF signaling in the immortalized, Quercetin, myricetin, and camphorol dramatically reduced the phosphorylation. Okay. Quercetin, Low concentrations of quercetin and camphorol inhibit AKT phosphorylation induced. So medulloblastoma is a highly metastatic cancer. Okay, yada 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 yada. Quercetin and camphorol at very low concentrations successfully inhibited the AKT phosphorylation induced by the activation of MET signaling. In fact, the inhibition of so this is how it works on the epigenome to stop cancer, whereas quercetin and myricetin did not inhibit this. The inhibition of AKT phosphorylation by quercetin was lower than that observed with EGCG. Low concentrations of quercetin, blah, 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 blah. Flavanols inhibit, okay, so the same. These results indicate that myricetin, camphorol, and quercetin, naturally occurring molecules, are within 1 order of magnitude as efficient as this here at inhibiting the migration. Quercetin, blah, 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 blah. Treatment with flavanols, camphorol, quercetin, and myricetin, or with MET kinase inhibitor. So either with the drug or with these natural flavanols, prevents morphological changes. Okay. Camphorol, quercetin, and myricetin prevent morphological changes induced by the were seeded onto gelatin-coated cover strips. Discussion. In this study, we showed that low concentrations of quercetin, myricetin, and camphorol, but not quercetin, a different form of quercetin, inhibit HGF-dependent phosphorylation. Okay, the inhibitory effect of quercetin and camphorol was associated with an impairment of AKT phosphorylation, so that's how it worked. Quercetin is known to act as a potent inhibitor of the phosphat whatever, which is essential for AKT activation, and its structure was used at the Dietary flavanol intake is estimated to be between 20 and 35 milligrams per day, of which quercetin represents the predominant flavanol. Quercetin naturally occurs as a glucoside or various glycoside forms that are either hydrolyzed by intestinal enzymes or by colonic microflora before they can be absorbed. Quercetin is of particular interest because micromolar plasma concentrations is achievable through diet. showed that an onion supplement consisting of 160 grams of stewed and homogenized onions, which provided 331 micromoles per liter of quercetin glucosides, equivalent to 100 milligrams of quercetin, was sufficient to observe quercetin peak concentration of 7.6 nanomoles per liter. Furthermore, one characteristic feature of quercetin bioavailability is that the elimination of quercetin metabolites is quite slow, with reported half-lives ranging from 11 to 28 hours. This is particularly interesting because this could favor accumulation in plasma with repeated intakes. These observations thus suggest the inhibitory effect of quercetin on this form of cancer here. Importantly, in vitro and in situ models of the blood-brain barrier, it was demonstrated that quercetin was able to enter different regions of the brain. Okay, that's important. This is in agreement with animal feeding studies that provide evidence that other flavanols, such as the T-flavanol EGCG, may access the brain following oral administration to mice. Rats fed blackberry or blueberry extracts rich in anthocyanidins had intracerebral localization of the molecules. Together, these results suggest that quercetin, among other dietary flavonoids, may access the brain after oral ingestion in humans. Although the potential chemopreventative effects of polyphenols on pediatric brain tumor development remain poorly understood, it is noteworthy that a good maternal diet during pregnancy, including a high consumption, of fruits and vegetables, had a strong protective dose-response relation. So keep that in mind. Not a carnivore diet. A high consumption of fruits and vegetables had a strong protective dose-response relation on the risk of pediatric brain tumors, whereas a high consumption of unhealthy foods like French fries, I can't believe they actually say that, but eating unhealthy foods like French fries significantly increase the odds of pediatric brain cancer. Okay. The use of drug combinations to circumvent tumor resistance is well established of cancer therapy. Okay, so medulloblastima aggressiveness, phytochemicals such as quercetin that target both of these pathways may thus circumvent this limitation and inhibit tumor cell progression more effectively. Furthermore, quercetin-rich foods also contain plenty of other phytochemicals that act synergistically with quercetin and increase the chemopreventative activity. So not just quercetin, but when you're getting all of those different phytochemicals, they act synergistically and increase the chemopreventative capacity. In summary, these results suggest that flavanols at concentrations achievable through the human diet, inhibit cell migration by affecting both blah, 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 blah. Further studies aimed at the identification of beneficial effects of flavanols and medulloblastoma growth in vivo should provide interesting information on the clinical usefulness of these dietary-derived molecules in the prevention of pediatric brain tumors. Moving on. Low concentration of quercetin antagonizes the invasion of angiogenesis of human glioblastomas. Okay, let's move on here. Okay, study next, human umbilical vein, blah, 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 blah. In this study, they have found that quercetin inhibited glioblastoma cell migration and angiogenesis by downregulating the expression of these here pathways. Tumor invasion and angiogenesis are very complex and dynamic processes that are made of multi-step cascades. A number of molecules, such as growth factors, cell adhesion molecules, yada, yada, yada. Conclusion, their findings demonstrated that a low concentration of quercetin antagonized glioblastoma cell invasion and angiogenesis in vitro. So it stopped it in the dish. Okay, moving on. So this is about quercetin as a cancer chemopreventative. Quercetin may work as a cancer chemopreventative and chemotherapeutic agent, meaning both as a preventative and as a treatment agent, because this versatile substance, which owns antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties, may also kill cancer cells and hold senolytic properties. Moving on. So wait, one second. Senolytic properties means it's getting rid of the zombie cells. And moving on. Potential of flavonoid quercetin to prevent and treat cancer. Okay, so naturally occurring bioactive compounds are promising candidates to prevent and treat cancer. Quercetin is a well-known plant flavonoid that is reported to have anti-cancer actions in vitro and in vivo. This review focuses on the molecular mechanisms underlying the chemopreventative effect of quercetin and is a therapeutic and its therapeutic potential in oncology. Quercetin elicits biphasic, hormetic, dose-dependent, dose-dependent, the higher the dose, the better the outcome. It acts as an antioxidant and thus elicits chemopreventative effects at low concentrations, but functions as pro-oxidant and may therefore elicit chemotherapeutic effects at high concentrations. So it can act as a chemotherapeutic, a treatment at high concentrations, whereas it's a preventative at lower concentrations. Quercetin has multiple intracellular molecular targets with the potential to reverse treatment resistance and affect pleiotropic signaling processes that are altered in cancer cells. Studies suggest that quercetin binds to several receptors that play important roles in carcinogenesis. It regulates the expression of various genes, induces epigenetic changes. It induces epigenetic changes and interferes with enzymes that metabolize chemical carcinogens. In addition, it also elicits anti-inflammatory and antiviral effects. The ability of quercetin to induce apoptosis, cell death of cancer cells, without affecting non-cancer cells, so it helps the cancer cells die, but it doesn't cause the non-cancer cells to die, has been documented using various cell lines. Quercetin has anti-angiogenic, and so it stops the spread of blood vessels into the cancer, and anti-metastatic, so it stops the spread of cancer when used in combination with chemotherapy and radiotherapy. Quercetin can act as a sensitizer and protect non-cancer cells. So when it's used with radiation, it not only does it itself do this, but it helps to protect the cells and sensitize the cancer cells to radiation. Okay, so it protects the non-cancer cells while making the cancer cells more sensitive to radiation. The safety and potential usefulness of quercetin for the prevention and treatment of cancer have been documented in both animal experiments and phase 1 clinical trials. Current studies are focused on nanoformulations so that it can be absorbed better, so nanoformulations to overcome the low bioavailability, or you could take it with fat, of natural quercetin, which limits its clinical use as an anti-tumor agent. Quercetin, flavonoid, chemoprevention, oxidative stress, blah, 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 and moving on. The flavonoid quercetin in disease prevention and therapy, facts and fancies. Okay, so biochemical and genetic studies on cellular uptake and metabolism, yada yada yada, Quercetin can be considered the prototype of a naturally occurring chemopreventative agent because of its key roles in triggering the hallmarks of cancer. However, several critical points must be taken. 1, pharmacological versus nutraceutical doses applied. So are you using high enough doses, or are you using supplemental doses? So are you using doses like drug doses, high doses, or are you only using a nutraceutical dose? Specificity of its mechanism of action compared to other phytochemicals, and 3, identification of direct cellular targets, blah, blah, blah. Moving on. Dietary polyphenols in cancer prevention, the example of the flavonoid quercetin in leukemia. So increased consumption of fruit and vegetables can represent an easy strategy to significantly reduce the incidence of cancer. Increased consumption of fruit and vegetables can represent an easy strategy to significantly reduce the incidence of cancer. They recently demonstrated that the flavonoid quercetin, naturally present in the diet and belonging to the class of phytochemicals, is able to sensitize several leukemia cell lines and beta cells isolated, blah, blah, blah. In addition, apoptotic inducers. Further, it potentiates the effect of fludarabine, a first-line chemotherapeutic drug used against CLL. The pro-apoptotic activity of quercetin, meaning it helps to kill cancer, is related to the expression activity of yada yada yada. Quercetin downregulates this pathway in the mRNA and protein levels. Considering the low toxicity of the flavonoids toward normal peripheral blood cells, our experimental results, meaning these people's experimental results, are in favor of a potential use of quercetin as an adjuvant, meaning with other things, chemotherapy in leukemia or other types of cancer. And I'll stop this video right there, and I will continue with my next video in a little bit.